The tense encounter. The gas station sat on the outskirts of a small town, its fluorescent lights flickering like distant stars against the inky sky. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of fuel, and the low hum of the refrigerator units filled with soda and snacks. A few patrons milled about, oblivious to the scene unfolding outside. Jacob Williams, a seasoned Air Force lieutenant, sat in his black SUV, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. He had just returned from a deployment overseas, eager to reunite with his family. Instead, he found himself caught in a harrowing encounter that threatened to shatter his hopes of homecoming. As he watched Officer Jake Thompson approach his vehicle, a sense of foreboding washed over him. The officer's uniform, crisp and authoritative, radiated a sense of power that was now tainted with uncertainty. Jacob kept his hands firmly on the steering wheel, visibly aware of the tension in the air. He was acutely conscious of the prejudices that often clouded judgment, especially in moments like this. Officer Thompson's expression was a mixture of skepticism and tension. He eyed Jacob with a blend of apprehension and hostility. The lieutenant knew that many people still carried outdated stereotypes, and as a black man in uniform, he was all too familiar with the uphill battle against prejudice. "Stay calm, Jacob whispered to himself, breathing deeply to quell the rising anxiety. The gas station's harsh lights illuminated his face, revealing a weary man whose body bore the scars of service. He was proud of his achievements and sacrifices, but this moment felt like an explosion waiting to happen. "Get out of the car now," Jake shouted, his voice slicing through the stillness like a jagged knife. The command echoed against the metal surfaces of the gas station, drawing the attention of those inside. Jacob could feel their stares, a mixture of curiosity and fear, piercing him like daggers. The command sent a jolt through Jacob's body. He understood the urgency in the officer's tone, but he also recognized the danger that lay within the aggression. "Sir, please, just let me explain. Don't move," Officer Thompson barked, his voice trembling with a mix of fear and rage. The lieutenant could see the officer's hand hovering near his holstered weapon, and a sense of dread gripped his stomach. Any sudden movement could lead to a tragic misunderstanding. With a deep breath, Jacob slowly unbuckled his seatbelt, careful to keep his movements deliberate and visible. "I'm a lieutenant in the Air Force. I've just returned from deployment. I'm not a threat," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos unfolding around him. The tension hung in the air like a thick fog, and for a moment, time seemed to freeze. Jacob could feel the weight of history pressing down on him. The long history of mistrust between law enforcement and the black community, the unjust judgments, the fear that often morphed into aggression. As he opened the door, the dim light from the gas station caught the glint of his uniform insignia, shining like a beacon of hope in the night. He stepped out cautiously, hands raised to show he meant no harm. Officer Thompson's eyes widened as he took a step back, still gripping his weapon tightly. "Step away from the vehicle," he shouted, his voice echoing with authority that felt misplaced in this context. "Please," Jacob urged, his voice carrying a tone of desperation mixed with dignity. "You don't need to do this. I'm here for my family, not to cause trouble." But the officer's perception was clouded by fear, and Jacob could see that he was wrestling with the stereotypes that plagued so many minds. The lieutenant felt a surge of anger at the injustice of it all, the way his identity was reduced to a dangerous stereotype in the officer's eyes. "I'm not a criminal," Jacob shouted, frustration spilling over. "I serve my country. I'm just trying to get home." The gas station's lights cast long shadows, distorting their figures against the asphalt. A few onlookers stepped outside, drawn by the commotion. A mother clutched her child close, while a group of young men watched, their expressions a mix of concern and confusion. In that moment, Jacob felt exposed, not just as a soldier, but as a black man confronting the biases that seemed to hang over him like a dark cloud. He was used to navigating complex situations, but this felt different. He was battling not just for his freedom, but for the very essence of who he was. With the standoff stretching into silence, Jacob made a decision. "You need to see my ID," he said firmly, determined to defuse the situation. "It's in my back pocket. I'll reach for it slowly." Officer Thompson hesitated, caught between his instincts and the realization that Jacob's words held truth. But the tension remained, a tight coil waiting to unravel. As Jacob moved slowly, every muscle in his body tense, he could sense the moment hanging in the balance. "Just breathe, he told himself, fighting against the urge to retreat into fear. He was a soldier trained for combat, but this was a battle of a different sort, one that required a level of courage and calm he had not anticipated. With his hand reaching towards his pocket, he caught a glimpse of the gas station attendant watching from the entrance, her eyes wide with fear. Jacob felt a flicker of hope as he realized that witnesses were now observing, that his truth might be seen and validated. "I'm going to pull out my ID now," Jacob said, maintaining eye contact with Officer Thompson. He could see the officer's grip on his weapon loosen slightly, a momentary crack in the wall of fear. "Do it slowly," Jake said, his voice steadying as he took a cautious step back. The tension in the air shifted, and Jacob could feel the weight of the moment beginning to change. As he produced his military ID, he could sense the shift not just in the officer, but in the onlookers as well. "Here," Jacob said, offering the card, his heart racing, but his resolve unwavering. "I'm not your enemy." The officer's eyes darted between the ID and Jacob's face, struggling to reconcile the image of the man in front of him with the preconceived notions that had almost led to disaster. Jacob held his breath, waiting for the moment when understanding might break through the walls of prejudice. "Jacob Williams," Officer Thompson read aloud, his voice softening slightly. "Lieutenant, United States Air Force." Jacob nodded, relief flooding through him as he sensed the shift. This wasn't just about proving himself to the officer. It was about challenging the stereotypes that plagued their society. He had always believed in the power of understanding and communication, and perhaps, just perhaps, this moment could serve as a catalyst for change. In the distance, the familiar sound of sirens wailed, drawing closer. Jacob knew that more officers would soon arrive. The reality of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. He could easily become a statistic, a story of misunderstanding that perpetuated the very issues they were both struggling against. As Officer Thompson lowered his weapon slightly, Jacob felt a sense of cautious optimism. This was just the beginning, but it could lead to something greater, something that might bridge the chasm of mistrust between communities. "Don't believe I'm a lieutenant," Jacob said, a hint of defiance in his voice. "Then wait until my platoon arrives." His words echoed in the tense air, a promise of solidarity and strength that transcended the fear of the moment. The gas station, once a scene of tension, now felt charged with the possibility of transformation, a testament to the power of understanding in the face of prejudice. Tensions rise. The air at the gas station felt electric, a palpable tension hanging thick between Jacob and Officer Jake. The police cruiser's lights flash erratically, casting jagged shadows across the asphalt as onlookers watched with bated breath. Jacob remained in his vehicle, heart racing, knowing that any sudden movement could trigger an unfortunate escalation. The seatbelt felt like a vice, tightening around him, a harsh reminder of the fear that gripped his chest. "Get out of the car now." Officer Jake's voice broke through the silence, sharp and commanding. Jacob could hear the tremor beneath the authoritative tone, a mix of fear and confusion. It was a command he had heard too many times in his life, but this time it stung deeper, the fact that it came from someone in uniform, someone who was supposed to protect him, felt like a betrayal. Jacob kept his hands on the steering wheel, his palms clammy. "Officer, please, I'm a veteran. I'm just trying to get home to my family." His voice was calm, measured, each word deliberate as he tried to convey his intent. He could feel the eyes of the crowd boring into him, their gazes a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Jake's jaw tightened, a flicker of uncertainty passing over his features. The situation was more than just a traffic stop. It was an encounter charged with the weight of prejudice, historical trauma, and fear. "Step out of the vehicle," he repeated, the authority in his voice wavering. Jacob took a deep breath, knowing that he needed to defuse the situation before it escalated further. "I understand that you're doing your job, officer," he said slowly, choosing his words carefully. "But you need to know that I'm not a threat. I'm Lieutenant Jacob Williams, United States Air Force. I just returned from deployment." The mention of his military service hung in the air, a plea for recognition amidst the chaos. He could see the internal struggle etched on Jake's face. Was he prepared to reconcile the man before him with the prejudice he had been taught to uphold? "Let me see your hands," Jake shouted, his voice firm, yet a tremor of vulnerability slipped through. Jacob complied, raising his hands slowly and visibly. He could see Jake's mind racing, the conflicting emotions swirling within him. The tension was thick, and the weight of 1,000 assumptions pressed heavily on both of them. In the midst of the standoff, the female officer who had been silent until now stepped forward cautiously. Her name tag read Officer Parker, and she seemed more attuned to the gravity of the situation. "Jake, let's take a moment," she suggested, her voice softening as she approached. "We don't need to escalate this further. Do you know what he could be hiding?" Jake shot back, the edge of anger creeping into his tone. "He's in a black SUV. That alone raises suspicions." Jacob felt a rush of anger, but he knew he had to stay composed. "I understand how this might look," he said, striving to maintain his calm. "But I'm not here to harm anyone. I'm just a man trying to return home." A group of bystanders watched intently, whispering among themselves. Jacob noticed their expressions, a mixture of anxiety and disbelief. Would they understand the complexities of this moment? Would they see him as a person and not just a stereotype? "Jake, I can't breathe," Jacob said, his heart pounding as he tried to maintain his composure. "I'm not here to hurt you. Just look at my uniform." He gestured toward the insignia on his shoulder, a symbol of service and sacrifice. Officer Parker's eyes widened as she stepped closer, looking directly at Jacob. "Lieutenant, is there any way we can verify your identity without escalating this situation?" Jacob nodded, feeling the pressure ease just slightly. "Of course. My ID is in my back pocket. I'll retrieve it slowly so you can see that I'm not a threat." Jake hesitated, the wariness in his eyes giving way to confusion. "You're sure you want to do that?" "Yes, I just want to show you that I'm not someone to be afraid of," Jacob replied, his voice steady. He reached behind him slowly, feeling the weight of their scrutiny pressing down on him as he pulled out his military ID. "Here, look." As he handed it over, Jacob could see the flicker of realization dawn in Jake's eyes, the walls of prejudice beginning to crack. Officer Parker took the ID, glancing at it before handing it to Jake. He studied it closely, reading Jacob's rank and the years of service listed there. For a moment, silence enveloped them, the tension beginning to dissipate like fog under the morning sun. Jacob held his breath, praying that Jake would finally see him as a fellow human being, rather than the embodiment of his fears. "Lieutenant Jacob Williams," Jake read aloud, his voice quieter now. "Served in Iraq and Afghanistan." "Yes," Jacob replied, allowing a hint of pride to seep through his voice. "I've dedicated my life to serving this country. I wear this uniform with honor, just like you do." The crowd around them began to murmur, a ripple of understanding spreading among the onlookers. Jacob could see a few nodding in recognition, their expressions shifting from judgment to empathy. Perhaps they were beginning to see the complexities of the situation, to understand the shared humanity that existed beneath the surface. "Jake, this is not just about you and me," Jacob continued, his voice firm yet compassionate. "This is about the fear that comes from misunderstanding. We need to change that narrative. Together." Slowly, Jake's expression softened, his stance relaxing as he took a step back. "I didn't mean to. I was just scared," he admitted, his voice trembling slightly. "I've been trained to react to threats, and I let my instincts take over." Jacob felt a flicker of hope igniting within him. "I understand that fear. We've all been conditioned by our backgrounds and experiences, but we can't let that dictate our actions. We need to rise above our prejudices and learn from one another." As the sun began to dip lower in the sky, casting a golden glow over the scene, Jacob felt a shift in the atmosphere. The crowd began to disperse, their murmurs transforming into conversations filled with curiosity and reflection. This moment was a turning point, an opportunity for change that he never anticipated. "Let's talk about how we can move forward," Jacob suggested, gesturing toward a quieter area of the parking lot. "We need to find ways to educate our community and ourselves, to foster understanding rather than fear." Jake nodded, the weight of his earlier aggression lifting as he considered the possibilities. "You're right. I want to be better. I want to make a difference." Jacob smiled, a sense of camaraderie blossoming between them. "Together, we can. Let's take the lessons from today and use them to create a safer, more inclusive environment for everyone." As they walked away from the chaos of the gas station, Jacob knew that they were embarking on a new journey, one filled with the promise of change and understanding. It wouldn't be easy, but with each step they took, they were laying the groundwork for a better future, not just for themselves, but for the entire community. And so, with a renewed sense of purpose, Jacob stepped into the unknown, ready to forge connections that would transcend fear and build a bridge toward understanding. The journey ahead would be challenging, but he was determined to transform a moment of tension into a powerful opportunity for change. The aftermath. The days following the community forum were a whirlwind of activity. Jacob and Officer Jake transformed from acquaintances into allies, united by a shared goal of mending the rift between law enforcement and the residents. Their initial meeting sparked a fire of change, and they felt the responsibility to fan those flames into a lasting movement. Building momentum. The week after the forum, Jacob was overwhelmed by the enthusiasm from the community. People approached him in the streets, at local shops, and even at church, expressing their support for the initiatives they had discussed. Many were eager to volunteer their time and ideas, eager to take part in reshaping their community. Inspired by the residents' engagement, Jacob organized follow-up meetings at the community center. Each session was packed with individuals from all walks of life. Young students, retirees, parents, and even local business owners. Jacob made it clear that everyone's voice mattered, and each meeting became a forum for ideas and solutions. One Saturday morning, Jacob arrived early to prepare for the meeting. He set up a large whiteboard, eager to jot down suggestions from the attendees. As people filtered in, he greeted them with a warm smile and encouraged them to share their thoughts. It wasn't long before the room filled with animated conversations and hopeful laughter. "Let's start with what we want to achieve together," Jacob proposed. He asked everyone to share their vision for a better community. One by one, residents stood up, sharing stories of their experiences with law enforcement and the impact of community relations on their lives. A local school teacher spoke passionately about her students' fears of police interactions. "I see the anxiety in their eyes when they hear a siren. They don't see officers as protectors. They see them as threats. We need to change that narrative," she urged, her voice trembling with emotion. Another resident, a father of 3, chimed in, "My kids are afraid to walk home from school because they fear being stopped. They shouldn't have to live with that fear. We need to educate our kids and our officers on how to interact with each other positively." Jacob nodded vigorously, jotting down every idea. "How about we create a mentorship program?" he suggested. "We could pair officers with kids in the neighborhood, allowing them to build trust and understanding." The crowd erupted into applause, and excitement filled the room. From that moment, it was clear that the community was ready to take action. They formed committees to address various aspects of community engagement, such as youth programs, community policing, and educational workshops. Community policing initiatives. Over the next few weeks, Jacob and Officer Jake worked tirelessly to put their plans into action. They scheduled regular meetings with local police officers to discuss community concerns, aiming to foster a new approach to policing, one built on mutual respect and understanding. One sunny afternoon, they hosted a Meet Your Officer Day at the local park. Officers set up booths, answered questions, and engaged in conversations with families. There were games for the kids, food trucks, and live music, creating an inviting atmosphere. As the day unfolded, Jacob watched as children played tag with officers and families, shared laughs over barbecued hot dogs. It was a scene he had longed to see, a blending of community and law enforcement, breaking down barriers with every smile exchanged. A little girl approached Officer Jake, her eyes wide with curiosity. "Are you really a police officer?" she asked, tugging at his uniform. Jake knelt down to her level, smiling. "I am, and I'm here to help keep you safe. Would you like to learn how to call for help if you need it?" With the girl nodding enthusiastically, they spent the next few minutes discussing the importance of being safe while engaging the community. Her mother watched from a distance, her heart swelling with hope. This was the connection they had all been yearning for. Facing challenges. Despite the positive momentum, challenges soon emerged. Not everyone in the community embraced the changes. A vocal minority criticized Jacob and Officer Jake, claiming that their initiatives were merely a publicity stunt. Social media became a battleground, with heated debates surfacing in the comments section of local news articles. Feeling the pressure, Jacob organized a community meeting specifically to address these concerns. He invited critics to share their viewpoints openly and honestly. He believed that dialogue, even when difficult, was crucial for progress. As the meeting commenced, Jacob faced skepticism. One woman stood up, arms crossed, and asked pointedly, "How can we trust that this isn't just a temporary fix? We've seen it all before, promises made and then forgotten." Jacob took a deep breath, understanding her frustration. "I completely understand your concerns. Trust is not given. It's earned. I can't promise you everything will be perfect, but I can promise that we are committed to making this a long-term change. We are not going anywhere, and we want to work alongside you every step of the way." Officer Jake added, "We're here to listen. We want to hear what you think will help us improve. If we don't have that trust, we cannot do our jobs effectively." Gradually, the tension in the room eased as more residents began to share their thoughts. Jacob felt a wave of relief as discussions transitioned from skepticism to constructive dialogue. Media attention. As word of their efforts spread, local media outlets began to take notice. Jacob and Officer Jake were invited to appear on local news segments, discussing their initiative. They spoke about the importance of community engagement and the commitment to building lasting relationships. During one live broadcast, a news anchor asked, "What do you hope to achieve through this initiative?" Jacob responded, "Our goal is simple, to foster understanding and trust between the police and our community. We want to create a safe environment where everyone feels valued and heard." In the days that followed, social media buzzed with discussions about their efforts. The hashtag #CommunityUnity began trending in the area, with residents sharing their stories, pictures, and support for the initiative. It was heartening to see so many people rallying around the cause. Building a legacy. Weeks turned into months, and the community began to see tangible changes. Crime rates dropped, and there was a notable increase in community events, with officers frequently attending to participate in neighborhood activities. Jacob felt proud as he witnessed the positive shift. During one particular event, he stood alongside Officer Jake at a community fair, where children painted police cars and learned about safety in a fun, engaging way. As laughter filled the air, Jacob realized that they had made significant strides. Yet, in the back of his mind, he knew that the journey was far from over. While progress had been made, deep-rooted issues could not be resolved overnight. He was committed to ensuring that their initiatives would continue to evolve, adapting to the needs of the community as they arose. That night, Jacob lay in bed, reflecting on everything that had transpired. He thought about the people he had met, the stories he had heard, and the bonds that had formed. He felt hopeful, believing that their shared vision could foster lasting change. Little did he know that challenges lay ahead, ones that would test their resolve and the strength of the community they had built together. But with the foundation they had laid, Jacob felt prepared to face whatever obstacles would come their way, fueled by the belief that they were indeed capable of changing their world, one connection at a time. The challenge. As the seasons changed and the leaves turned from vibrant green to warm hues of orange and gold, Jacob felt the energy of the community he had helped to foster. The air was crisp, and the sense of unity felt palpable. However, he also sensed an undercurrent of tension that simmered just below the surface, a challenge that would soon demand all of their courage and determination. A tipping point. One chilly evening, Jacob attended a neighborhood watch meeting at the community center. The room buzzed with excitement as residents discussed plans for their upcoming Halloween festivities. Families shared ideas for safe trick-or-treating routes and organized fun activities that would bring neighbors together. However, the tone shifted when a man named Marcus stood up. A longtime resident known for his fiery speeches, Marcus often brought a mix of wisdom and raw emotion to the discussions. While we're celebrating Halloween, let's not forget that we have deeper issues at play, he started, his voice booming across the room. There are still divisions in our community. We need to address those, not just brush them under the carpet. Jacob felt a knot tighten in his stomach. He had been aware that not all residents were satisfied with the progress they had made, but he hoped the meeting would remain positive. Marcus continued, "We have to confront the systemic issues that still plague us. Our children need to know that they can trust the police, but they also need to see that there are real, systemic problems that need fixing." The room fell silent, and Jacob could sense the tension rising. Some nodded in agreement, while others shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Jacob knew this was a pivotal moment. They could either face the challenge head-on or retreat into complacency. "We hear you, Marcus," Jacob said, attempting to break the silence. "You're right. We have made strides, but that doesn't mean we can become complacent. It's vital that we continue to acknowledge and address these deeper issues together." Difficult conversations. Encouraged by Jacob's response, Marcus pressed on. "Then let's talk about it. I want to know what steps are being taken to address racial profiling, to ensure our children don't have to fear the very people sworn to protect them. What's the plan, Jacob?" Jacob took a deep breath, knowing that this conversation would be uncomfortable but necessary. "We've started to engage in community policing initiatives, and we're working to foster relationships between officers and residents. But I realize that we need to do more," he replied. "It's about creating a dialogue that extends beyond forums. We need workshops, educational programs, and open conversations that will address biases directly." The discussion grew heated as different residents shared their opinions. Some expressed support for Marcus's call to action, while others argued that they should focus on celebrating their progress instead of dwelling on the negatives. Jacob listened intently, recognizing the importance of validating everyone's experiences and feelings. After several tense exchanges, a woman named Linda, a school counselor, spoke up. "What if we create a community task force? We can bring together residents and police officers to work collaboratively on these issues. We could have monthly meetings to address concerns and find solutions as a united front." The room buzzed again, this time with a mix of hope and skepticism. Jacob seized the opportunity to rally everyone. "I believe that's an excellent idea. A task force can help keep this conversation going, hold us accountable, and ensure we're actively working to bridge any gaps that remain." The task force takes shape. In the weeks that followed, Jacob and Marcus worked tirelessly to form the task force, gathering volunteers and scheduling meetings. They decided to invite community leaders, educators, and law enforcement representatives to join, aiming to create a diverse group that could truly represent the voices of the community. At their first meeting, Jacob was struck by the variety of perspectives in the room. Some attendees were longtime advocates for justice reform, while others were community members eager to engage in dialogue. Everyone had their own experiences, and the energy was a mix of tension and excitement. Jacob opened the meeting by expressing gratitude for their commitment to tackling difficult issues. "Thank you all for being here today. We're at a critical juncture, and your involvement is crucial. We're here to listen, learn, and work together towards solutions." As discussions unfolded, the task force focused on specific topics: racial profiling, community engagement, and transparency in policing. They brainstormed ideas for workshops, town hall meetings, and outreach programs aimed at educating both officers and residents about each other's experiences and challenges. One evening, as the meeting adjourned, Jacob and Marcus lingered, continuing their discussion. "I think this is going to take off, Jacob," Marcus said, a spark of excitement in his eyes. "But we need to make sure we're addressing the hard questions. We can't shy away from the uncomfortable truths." Jacob nodded, fully aware of the challenges ahead. "I agree. If we're going to make real change, we have to confront the tough stuff, no matter how uncomfortable it gets." A night of reckoning. As the task force gained traction, an unexpected event would test their resolve. Late one night, Jacob received a frantic call from a community member. A young black man named Jamal had been stopped by police while walking home from a late shift at work. The encounter escalated, resulting in Jamal being detained for hours without clear justification. Jacob felt a surge of anger and frustration. This was the kind of situation they had been working tirelessly to avoid. He quickly organized a meeting with the task force to discuss their response. Gathering that same evening, the room was thick with tension. Members were divided on how to handle the situation. Some argued for a peaceful demonstration outside the police station, while others advocated for a more diplomatic approach. Jacob felt the weight of the community's expectations on his shoulders. "We need to be strategic," Jacob urged. "We want to ensure Jamal's voice is heard, but we also need to maintain a constructive dialogue with the police. Let's plan a community meeting where we can discuss this incident openly, allowing residents to share their feelings, while also giving officers a chance to explain the circumstances." The task force agreed to move forward with Jacob's plan, recognizing the importance of channeling their emotions into a productive discussion. They scheduled the meeting for the following week, promoting it through social media and local flyers. The meeting. On the night of the community meeting, the atmosphere was charged. Residents filled the community center, and the energy was palpable. Jacob stood at the front, flanked by Officer Jake and Marcus. The diverse crowd buzzed with anticipation, eager to share their experiences and emotions. Jacob opened the meeting by acknowledging the gravity of the situation. "Thank you all for coming tonight. We're here to address what happened to Jamal, and to ensure that every voice in this community is heard. This is a safe space for dialogue, and I encourage everyone to share their thoughts honestly." As people began to speak, the emotions poured out. Some residents recounted their own experiences of being stopped by police, while others shared their fears for their children's safety. The room grew tense as anger and frustration swirled in the air. When Jamal finally stood up, the crowd fell silent. He was visibly shaken but determined. "I didn't think this would happen to me. I'm just trying to live my life. Why do I have to be afraid when I see a police car?" His voice trembled as he recounted the details of the night, the fear he felt, and the lack of support he received. The crowd erupted in applause, and Jacob felt a swell of empathy for Jamal. "Thank you for sharing your story," Jacob said, stepping forward. "Your experience matters, and we're here to listen and learn." As the evening unfolded, Officer Jake spoke candidly about the challenges officers faced and how they could work together to improve interactions with the community. He acknowledged the mistakes that had been made and expressed a sincere desire to learn from them. "I know this has created distrust, and I want to be part of the solution," he stated. Jacob felt the tension slowly ease as the crowd began to see Officer Jake as an ally rather than an adversary. They were not there to assign blame, but to foster understanding and healing. Building trust. In the weeks that followed, Jacob and the task force worked diligently to turn the discussion into action. They implemented a series of community workshops focusing on police interactions, bias awareness, and conflict resolution. The goal was to equip both officers and residents with the tools they needed to engage in positive and constructive dialogue. They also launched a mentorship program where police officers volunteered to connect with local youth. The program aimed to create relationships built on trust and understanding, showing young people that law enforcement was there to support them, not to instill fear. As time passed, Jacob witnessed a shift in attitudes. While challenges remained, the ongoing discussions and initiatives helped to bridge some of the divides. Trust was slowly being rebuilt, one conversation at a time. During one of the mentorship sessions, Jacob watched as Officer Jake played basketball with a group of kids. Laughter filled the air as they joked and teased one another. This was the vision he had held onto, an environment where fear was replaced with friendship and understanding. One afternoon, as the sun began to set, Jacob sat down with Officer Jake outside the community center. They reflected on how far they had come and the work that lay ahead. "We've made progress, but we can't stop here," Jacob said, a determined look in his eyes. "I agree," Jake replied. "We've created a foundation, but now it's about building upon it. There will always be challenges, but we can face them together." Jacob nodded, knowing that the path ahead would not always be easy. They were committed to ensuring that their community would continue to grow stronger, more united, and more resilient, regardless of the obstacles they faced. As they sat together, a sense of hope filled the air, promising that their story was far from over. They were ready to embrace the challenges ahead, united in their mission to create a better future for their community. Rising tensions. The air was thick with anticipation as Jacob prepared for the upcoming town hall meeting, where they would discuss the progress of the community task force. As the leaves fell, signaling the end of autumn and the approach of winter, Jacob sensed an undercurrent of unrest in the community. While they had made significant strides, not everyone was on board with the changes. The upcoming meeting promised to be a turning point, a chance to either solidify their gains or risk losing the momentum they had built. A challenging environment. As Jacob entered the community center, he noticed a mix of familiar faces and some newcomers. While many residents were there to support the task force and its initiatives, he could see others lurking in the shadows, their expressions skeptical and guarded. Jacob recognized some of them as longtime critics of the police department and the task force. He knew that the dialogue could become heated and that tensions were likely to flare. "Welcome, everyone," Jacob began, his voice steady but warm. "Tonight, we're here to celebrate our progress, but also to listen to your concerns. This is a safe space for dialogue. I urge everyone to share their thoughts openly, as we continue working together to strengthen our community." He took a moment to scan the crowd, looking for nods of encouragement. Several residents stepped forward, expressing their gratitude for the task force's efforts. They shared stories of how the community policing initiatives had improved their interactions with law enforcement. It was a heartening start. But as the evening progressed, the atmosphere began to shift. A man named Richard, known for his outspoken criticism of the police, stood up. "While you talk about progress, I want to know why there are still instances of racial profiling in our community." His voice was loud, echoing through the room. "Why should we believe anything has changed?" The room grew tense as murmurs rippled through the crowd. Jacob felt the pressure mount. He could sense the fragility of their progress hanging in the balance. Facing the music. "Thank you for sharing your concerns, Richard," Jacob replied, trying to keep his voice calm. "I understand your frustration. We are working diligently to change the culture within the department and to ensure that all residents feel safe and respected. But I want to hear specific examples of how we can improve." Richard stepped forward, his arms crossed defiantly. "I've seen it. Just last week, my neighbor was stopped for no reason. It's as if nothing has changed at all. You can't just gloss over these issues because you've held a few meetings." The crowd was silent, each person absorbing the gravity of Richard's words. Jacob recognized the importance of addressing this moment with empathy and transparency. "I acknowledge that there are still systemic issues in law enforcement, not just here but across the country. But I assure you, we are committed to ongoing training and community engagement to tackle these issues head-on." As tensions simmered, Jacob felt a surge of determination. "I invite you to share specific incidents with us so we can address them directly. This is about building trust and accountability, and that starts with honest conversations." The community speaks. As the evening unfolded, more residents stepped forward to share their experiences. Some expressed gratitude for the changes, while others echoed Richard's concerns, recounting instances where they felt wronged or dismissed by law enforcement. Jacob listened attentively, jotting down notes, acknowledging their pain, and promising to bring their stories to the task force meetings for further discussion. Amidst the growing tension, Marcus took the floor. "We're not here to point fingers or to assign blame," he said, his voice steady. "We're here to find solutions. The fact that we're having this conversation shows that we're making progress. But let's make sure we're holding everyone accountable, police and residents alike." His words resonated with many in the room, calming some of the agitation. Jacob realized that Marcus's perspective was vital in bridging the gap between the officers and the community. Together, they could foster an environment where everyone felt heard. "Thank you, Marcus," Jacob said, grateful for the support. "Let's take this feedback seriously. We'll have follow-up meetings to address the specific issues raised tonight, and I encourage everyone to continue engaging with us. We want to be partners in this journey." A community divided. However, not everyone was satisfied. As the meeting came to a close, Jacob noticed a small group lingering by the exit, whispering among themselves. Their body language suggested dissent, and Jacob's instincts told him that they were planning to take further action. The following day, Jacob received an anonymous tip that a protest was being organized against the police department, scheduled to coincide with the next community event. The news unsettled him. While protests were a legitimate form of expression, he worried that the divisions within the community could widen even further. Realizing the urgency of the situation, Jacob called an emergency meeting with the task force. He gathered Marcus, Officer Jake, and several other key members, sharing the news about the impending protest. "This could escalate quickly," Jacob said, concern etched on his face. "We need to be proactive. We should organize a counter-event that invites the community to dialogue rather than protest. We need to show that we're committed to listening and understanding each other." Marcus nodded, his expression serious. "We need to make it clear that we're here for the community. We want to engage, not divide. If we can create a safe space for conversations during the event, we can counteract the negative energy." Officer Jake added, "We should encourage the police to participate positively, showing that we're willing to engage with residents. This could help alleviate some of the fears and frustrations." Planning for unity. With a renewed sense of urgency, the task force got to work. They quickly organized an event called Community Conversation, which would take place in the park during the same time as the protest. They secured speakers from the community, including residents who had shared their experiences, as well as police officers willing to engage in honest dialogue. As the days passed, Jacob poured his heart and soul into preparing for the event. He reached out to local media outlets, hoping to promote the positive message of unity and understanding. He wanted to emphasize that the community was ready to take a stand against divisiveness. However, as the day approached, he felt the weight of uncertainty pressing down on him. Would enough people show up? Would the protest overshadow their efforts? Jacob knew that the stakes were high. They had to show the community that dialogue was more powerful than dissent. On the day of the event, as Jacob set up the park with volunteers, he noticed the crowd gathering. Initially, it appeared small, with a handful of families and individuals milling about. But as the time for the event drew nearer, people began to trickle in, drawn by the promise of an open forum, a day of reckoning. The atmosphere buzzed with anticipation as Jacob took the stage, flanked by Marcus and Officer Jake. He could feel the weight of the moment. This was their opportunity to demonstrate the power of community engagement. "Welcome, everyone," Jacob began, his voice steady. "Thank you for joining us today. We know that our community has faced significant challenges, but today we come together to listen and learn from one another. This is a safe space for honest dialogue, and I encourage everyone to share their thoughts." The crowd responded with a mix of applause and murmurs, a mixture of hope and skepticism. Jacob gestured for Marcus to speak next. "Today, we stand united. This isn't about blame. It's about understanding," Marcus said, his voice firm. "We have the power to shape our community's future, and that starts with listening to each other. Let's use this time to bridge the gaps that divide us." As they transitioned into an open forum, residents took turns sharing their stories, concerns, and hopes for the future. Jacob watched in awe as the dialogue flowed. People who had once been enemies were now conversing like allies. Suddenly, a woman stood up, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid of what my kids will face when they go out in the world. I want them to feel safe, but I don't know how to help them navigate this." Her vulnerability resonated with the crowd. Jacob stepped forward. "You're not alone. We all want the same thing, safety and understanding for our families. Let's talk about how we can work together to address those fears." Unexpected developments. As the day continued, Jacob felt the atmosphere shift toward a more profound connection among attendees. Then, just as hope seemed to be blossoming, a loud voice interrupted from the back of the crowd. "What about the protest?" A man shouted, his arms raised defiantly. "You can't pretend everything is okay. We want real change, not just talk." The crowd stirred, some expressing agreement, while others shot him looks of disdain. Jacob could feel the energy shift once again. He knew they were at a pivotal moment, a chance to either fracture the progress they had made or seize the opportunity for genuine engagement. "Let's address the protest directly," Jacob called out, trying to regain control. "We acknowledge the frustrations and anger felt by many in this community. It's okay to be upset, and it's okay to demand change. But we must do this together, through dialogue, rather than division." At that moment, Richard stepped forward. "We want to be heard. We want to ensure our voices matter in this community. We're tired of feeling powerless." Jacob nodded, understanding the pain behind Richard's words. "Your voice matters, Richard. Let's use this platform to express those frustrations constructively. What do you need from us?" The atmosphere in the park began to shift again as people engaged in deep discussions about their fears and aspirations. Jacob felt a sense of hope rise within him, but he also understood that the battle for unity was far from over. A long road ahead. As the day came to a close, Jacob looked out at the crowd, now filled with animated conversations and a sense of camaraderie. The event had been a success. They had brought together diverse voices, and the energy was palpable. It was a moment that felt like a turning point. However, as they packed up, Jacob knew that they had merely scratched the surface. There were still deep-rooted issues to address, and the path forward would require ongoing commitment from everyone involved. The community task force had ignited a spark of hope, but they needed to fan the flames of unity and understanding. Today was just the beginning. Jacob reminded the group as they gathered for a debrief. "We must continue these conversations, keep the dialogue open, and work toward meaningful change. It's up to us to build bridges, not walls." As they left the park, Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose. He was determined to stay the course, knowing that real change would take time, effort, and the collective commitment of every member of the community. The fight for understanding and acceptance was just beginning, and Jacob was ready to lead the charge. Building a brighter future. The weeks following the community event passed in a whirlwind of activity. The discussions that had taken place in the park ignited a fire within the community. It became clear to Jacob that they were not only hungry for change, but also eager to contribute to shaping their future. As the task force convened regularly, each member brought fresh ideas and passion to the table. The impact of engagement. Jacob could feel the momentum building as residents began to take ownership of the initiatives discussed during the community forum. Local businesses offered their venues for meetings and workshops, while individuals stepped up to lead discussions on critical topics such as racial bias, community policing, and youth engagement. One evening, Jacob attended a workshop organized by a group of high school students passionate about social justice. They had formed a club dedicated to fostering dialogue between youth and law enforcement, emphasizing the importance of mutual understanding. The students had invited police officers to share their experiences and perspectives, creating a space where both parties could engage authentically. Jacob felt a swell of pride as he watched these young leaders facilitate discussions that had once seemed impossible. "I never realized how much we have in common," a student named Lily shared during the workshop. "It's eye-opening to hear the challenges officers face while trying to do their jobs, just like we have challenges in our communities." The honesty and vulnerability in that room were palpable, breaking down the walls of distrust that had lingered for far too long. Jacob knew that these conversations were pivotal in reshaping perceptions and fostering a more cohesive community. Facing challenges together. However, despite the progress, challenges persisted. One evening, Jacob received a call from Officer Jake, who was out on patrol. "Jacob, we have a situation," he said, his voice tense. "There's been a report of an altercation at the high school between a few students and a couple of officers. It's getting heated, and we need to intervene before it escalates." Jacob's heart raced. He knew that tensions between law enforcement and youth were still fragile, and any misstep could undo their hard work. "I'm on my way," he replied, urgency propelling him forward. When Jacob arrived at the school, he was greeted by a chaotic scene. A group of students was gathered, their faces filled with anger and frustration. Officer Jake stood nearby, attempting to mediate the situation. "What happened?" Jacob asked as he approached the officers, his heart pounding. One of the students, a tall boy named Jamal, stepped forward. "We were just talking, and they accused us of being disrespectful. It escalated when they tried to take one of my friend's phones." Jacob took a deep breath, assessing the situation. He knew that misunderstandings could quickly spiral into conflict. "Let's take a step back," he said calmly. "Everyone deserves to be heard. Jamal, can you share what happened from your perspective?" As Jamal recounted the events, Jacob noticed the officers beginning to relax. This was their chance to model the respectful dialogue they had been advocating for all along. He made eye contact with Officer Jake, who nodded, encouraging his fellow officers to listen. After Jamal finished speaking, Jacob turned to the officers. "Can you share your side of the story? It's important for everyone to understand each other's perspectives." The officers explained their intentions, highlighting their commitment to keeping the students safe while also maintaining order. As they spoke, Jacob could sense the tension in the air begin to dissipate. They were all on the same team, working towards the same goal of creating a safer environment. Forging new alliances. In the aftermath of the incident, Jacob organized a follow-up meeting at the school. He wanted to ensure that the issues raised were addressed and that students felt comfortable discussing their concerns without fear of repercussion. He invited not only law enforcement officers, but also community leaders, parents, and students. The meeting quickly evolved into a brainstorming session where participants shared ideas on improving communication and trust between the police and the youth. "We need more opportunities for dialogue," suggested one parent. "Maybe regular town hall meetings just for young people to express their concerns." "Yes," Jamal added enthusiastically. "If we can have more informal gatherings, maybe we can bridge the gap. We're all in this together." Jacob was impressed by the outpouring of support and creativity in the room. It became clear that their collective voice could drive real change. They left the meeting energized, ready to put their ideas into action. Unity in action. As the months rolled on, Jacob felt a renewed sense of purpose. They organized youth forums that created safe spaces for teenagers to voice their concerns. These gatherings not only encouraged dialogue, but also fostered a sense of empowerment among the youth, allowing them to take an active role in shaping their community. One evening, during one of the youth forums, Jacob shared his own experiences as a veteran, emphasizing the importance of service and sacrifice in building a better society. Each of us has a role to play in ensuring our community is safe and welcoming, he said. It doesn't matter your age, race, or background. Your voice matters. We're all in this together. After the forum, a young girl named Sophia approached him. "Thank you for sharing, Mr. Jacob," she said shyly. "I want to help too. I think we should have a community cleanup day where we can all work together." Jacob smiled at her enthusiasm. "That's an excellent idea, Sophia. Let's make it happen. When we come together to serve our community, we build connections and show that we care." The cleanup day. Days later, the community cleanup day arrived. Residents gathered early in the morning, armed with garbage bags and brooms. Jacob watched as families, students, and officers mingled, their camaraderie palpable. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement and laughter as they picked up trash from parks, streets, and neighborhoods. It was a refreshing sight, a diverse group united by a common goal. Jacob couldn't help but feel hopeful for the future. During a break, Jacob spoke to a group of officers who had joined in. "This is what it's all about," he said. "Community engagement is essential. We're not just law enforcement. We're part of this community." Officer Jake, now more comfortable interacting with residents, nodded in agreement. "I can see how this fosters trust. It's not just about enforcement. It's about relationships." Unexpected recognition. As the day drew to a close, Jacob noticed a woman approaching him with a group of children in tow. "Jacob, thank you for organizing this," she said, her eyes shining with appreciation. "I've seen a change in my neighborhood since you started the task force. It feels like we're finally working together." Jacob was taken aback by her kind words, but he understood that the collective effort of everyone involved was what truly made the difference. "This is a team effort," he replied humbly. "It takes all of us to build a stronger community." As the sun began to set, casting a warm glow over the neighborhood, Jacob gathered everyone for a final reflection. "Thank you all for your hard work today. We've shown that when we come together, we can achieve great things. Let's continue this momentum and keep the conversations going." The road ahead. Weeks turned into months, and the task force continued to evolve. They implemented regular community forums and began planning workshops focused on topics like conflict resolution, mental health awareness, and restorative justice. Jacob felt a sense of fulfillment as he watched their efforts blossom into something meaningful. One day, as he walked through the community park, Jacob spotted a familiar face. Richard, the man who had challenged him during the initial town hall meeting. Richard was talking to a group of children, sharing stories and laughter. Jacob approached cautiously. "Richard, it's good to see you here," Jacob said, genuinely curious about how he was feeling about the changes. Richard turned to him, a smile breaking across his face. "You know, I was skeptical at first, but seeing all these kids come together has changed my perspective. I think we're finally moving in the right direction." Jacob felt a swell of gratitude. "Your voice helped spark these conversations. Thank you for being willing to engage with us. It's essential that we keep this dialogue alive." A new chapter. As the seasons changed, the community task force continued to grow, attracting new members eager to contribute. The changes they had implemented were not merely surface level, they were foundational, reshaping the relationships between law enforcement and the residents. One evening, during a celebration of their achievements, Jacob stood before the crowd. "Tonight, we celebrate not just our accomplishments, but the spirit of unity that has emerged from our efforts." This is just the beginning. Together, we have created a model for collaboration that can inspire other communities facing similar challenges. The crowd erupted in applause, a wave of shared pride and determination sweeping through the air. Jacob looked out at the faces of friends, allies, and advocates, feeling a sense of hope that had once felt elusive. They had created a space where dialogue flourished. Trust grew, and understanding reigned. As he stood there, Jacob realized that this journey was not just about him or the task force. It was about the collective power of a community willing to stand together, face their challenges, and embrace a brighter future. Conclusion: a lasting legacy. The path ahead remained long and complex, but the foundation had been laid. Jacob understood that true change would take continuous effort and a commitment to nurturing the relationships they had built. The community had embarked on a journey together, one rooted in understanding, resilience, and the belief that they could create a better tomorrow. As he gazed out at the smiling faces before him, Jacob felt a profound sense of gratitude. They had all played a part in this transformation, and together, they would continue to build a legacy of unity and strength for generations to come. In the years that followed, Jacob would often reflect on that pivotal night at the gas station, where fear and misunderstanding had threatened to divide them. Now, instead of a scene of chaos and tension, they had forged a new narrative, one of hope, collaboration, and a shared commitment to creating a community where everyone felt safe, valued, and heard. With renewed purpose and a heart full of hope, Jacob was ready to lead the charge into this new chapter, knowing that together they could overcome any obstacle in their way.